From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine with Nick BERES.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine on this Wednesday. Nick BERES here, and we have a good show, as always, on tap for you. Of course, one of the big stories right now, or the big story in the country, the George Floyd verdict came down yesterday. Derek Chauvin found guilty on all 3 of the counts. And so now, reaction to it. Now, we're not, since there's been a lot of that, going to spend the entire program just talking about that. It's important to note that as that case wraps up, there are other cases that are going to be going to trial, and not just in Minnesota, but here in Tennessee. In fact, here in Nashville, starting on July 1st, Andrew Delke, a decommissioned Metro police officer, will be standing trial for first-degree murder, first-degree murder in the shooting death of Daniel Hambrick. That was back in July of 2018. Another high-profile case. Another incident of an officer-involved shooting, an incident where the officer happened to be white and the individual who was shot black. There are similarities between the Floyd case and the Hambrick case, though I will say this, that the cases too are very, very different. But does what happened in the Floyd case set the stage to some degree for what's going to happen here in Nashville in a couple of months when that trial begins? We're going to talk about that. Take your phone calls. We are streaming live on Facebook this morning. I'll be following it there. If any of you have questions or comments there, hit it up there, as well as you can call and join the show at 737-7587. And to talk about this is, I'm not a lawyer, I play one on TV. But News Channel 5, Nick Leonardo has taught me so much about the legal profession, and he's with us, our legal analyst. Good to have you on this morning.
Well, good to be here, and don't downplay it. You've learned a lot about the law over the years, Nick.
I've learned a lot from you and some other attorneys I've worked with, but boy. All right, so yeah, let's start off just with George Floyd, and as I said, we'll take comments and calls from folks as we move through the show. But first, to you, there were the 3 charges, and this jury only deliberated for about 12 hours, it seems like, and came back, of course, as we all know now, with guilty verdicts on all 3.
Which is significant.
Your reaction to that, and the fact that they didn't deliberate all that long, do you anticipate that when they left that courtroom after closing arguments, all of them had pretty much decided how they were going to vote, but they just took 12 hours to do their diligence and go over some evidence just to make sure they all were on the same page?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, when they broke from closing arguments the first day, I mean, they would have had, they would have taken a break, and then they would have, selected a 4-person and possibly taken a vote that particular evening.
Only a couple hours, 2 or 3 hours that night.
Right, and they would have had dinner, and so obviously when they took that vote, I mean, there may have been 1 or 2 people that were maybe hung on some lesser charges potentially, or that needed a healthy debate to get everyone on the same page, and so when they came back the next day, they were able to do that, and I think it's stunning that they returned a unanimous verdict on all 3 of these counts.
Stunning. Would you say, though, the key, as it will be, I think, in the Delke case, the video? I mean, to me, I think so many people saw that video, and it was a very difficult hurdle for the defense to get over, to try to explain away what people saw on the video. Was that really it? And then if not, too, talk about some of the witnesses, because we know the police chief was called, and actually he himself said this was not this guy's training. So what was the most damaging evidence? It has to be video first, right?
Well, I think there's an old philosopher named Benton that said publicity is the soul of justice. Okay? And so, does video matter? Absolutely. If you recall, 30 years ago, we had a video of Rodney King, but of course those officers, were acquitted, and even with that video. I think in the 30 years that have, since passed, everyone has a smartphone. We're seeing more and more video. We have body cameras now from the police. And so I think that is a very integral part of what is going on in America, and we're seeing a shift as a result of this video. So I think the video is definitely a key component. I think without the video, you would not have had a trial, and Mr. Floyd would still be dead. So I think the video is very much so something that had a huge impact because you had to watch it. You had to sit there for all 9 minutes and 29 seconds and watch this horrific act. And I definitely think that had a huge impact on the jury, and I think it's going to continue as we see more and more criminal trials that have body cam footage, or just in this particular instance, you had a brave individual, a young person who took this video. I mean, I think that individual got death threats and everything for having done that, but I think it's very important that we're seeing that video 30 years later since Rodney King does make a huge difference.
Yeah, you know, the videos too, keep in mind the police body cam video can work both ways.
Sure.
In this case, I think it was damaging to the police officer. There are other cases where claims are made and the video shows the police officer did absolutely nothing wrong. Now, I know in a lot of these types of cases where police officers are charged, one of the elements of defense is their attorney arguing it's their training. This is what they were trained. We'll get into more in this, I think, as we talk about the Delke case as we move forward in today's show. But it seemed like the prosecution in the Floyd case tried to really shoot that down right off the bat by calling his supervisors and others to say, yeah, there's training, but we don't teach you to do this.
Well, and you know, you got to keep in mind too that the district attorney in every city in every state, they rely on police officers to make their case, and so you see that they have to have a close relationship with police officers. So if you're going to prosecute a police officer and you're the district attorney's office, you have to bring your A game. You have to bring your best witnesses and your best prosecutors, and that's what they did. And I thought it was absolute. Two things they did that I thought they did a great job of. Any of the negative things that may have tried to come out, I think the prosecution put that forward and tried to take the sting out of it a little bit so that the defense didn't really have much to talk about. But when you have, and I think it was the chief of police getting on the stand saying this is not consistent with our training, you know, that just really guts the defense. I think that was very instrumental in this conviction.
The other element that some people have brought up, it was a big story when the city of Minneapolis settled with the Floyd family in a civil lawsuit for $27 million. And that was before the criminal trial. And, you know, they're saying this is no admission of guilt, but we're settling this civil lawsuit. Explain why they settle in instances like this. I guess because in a civil lawsuit, maybe the burden of proof is less. But you also wonder about a juror selected, and they're asked to be impartial, but they've seen the news report that the city settled for $27 million. I mean, it's just common sense to say, well, the city wouldn't do that unless the officer did something wrong. And so you wonder, how does that play? Does that make it fair when the criminal trial comes later?
Well, I mean, that's not going to be admissible, and it was not admissible in this case.
But you have to figure those jurors probably saw this. They weren't selected yet. It came beforehand. They had to be aware of that. They had to be asked to set that aside, I suppose.
And they may have been mentioned in voir dire because we didn't really hear a lot about that. But I mean, it's two separate things. You know, a criminal case has a different burden of proof, and you're focusing on the actions of the individual. In this case, you're focusing on the actions of Chauvin, okay, in a criminal case. But in a civil case, you're focusing on the actions maybe of a city, of a police department. Did he have write-ups? Was he a loose cannon? Did they know they had problems with him? Did they not, you know, cross all the T's and dot all the I's? And at the end of the day, they realized that there was some exposure here to the city, and so they decided they wanted to go ahead and obviously, you know, close that and settle that prior, you know, as opposed to having it drag out. Okay,
and that's what I was just going to ask you, because we also know in the Delke case here, the city of Nashville has settled with his estate, Daniel Hambrick's estate, for $2.5 million, all right? Much less than the case up in Minnesota. But is there a reason? I mean, why, I would think, okay, if you're going to settle this civil lawsuit, fine, get to it. But why not wait till after the criminal trial?
Well, and sometimes you see that. Sometimes you'll see that there's usually a civil lawsuit, like a wrongful death lawsuit or something like that, that's ancillary to, you know, a criminal prosecution. And a lot of times, the civil case will be placed on hold, and discovery's placed on hold, and you're not allowed to depose any witnesses until conclusion of the criminal trial. But I believe both of these lawsuits were in federal court. They were 1983 actions, okay, are violation of civil rights. And even if any plaintiff in a case like that gets awarded $1, gets awarded $1,000, the attorneys can get their attorney fees out of this, you know, dollar for dollar. So, you know, when you have 4 or 5 lawyers at $400 or $500 an hour, it really adds up, and so there can be exposure to the city. So what they do in their legal departments is sit around, figure out their exposure, and think, okay, long term, not only could this cost us maybe potentially more money, but what effect does it have on the citizens? What effect does it have, you know, on just everyone out here who's watching this? Why are we fighting this? And so if we could reach a viable settlement, not only does it potentially save the city money, but it's also good for the citizens and residents of that community.
Okay, and just with that point, do you believe that jurors seeing a civil settlement or being aware of it can impact their deliberations in the criminal trial?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a lawyer. you're a quasi-lawyer, you know the difference, but but obviously yes, because you would think that as a layperson, if the city's going to, dole over a big bunch of money before a criminal trial, then you think, okay, somebody had to have done something wrong. But again, that's something that you would ask about in voir dire, the process where you question these jurors. I mean, I'm sure that may have been something that was brought up, and it needed to be brought up because they needed to understand that there's a difference in the fact that something, may have been settled versus, what you're doing here today or what you would be asked to do here today under the criminal law.
Let's take a phone call or two before we take the first break. We've got Lizzie on line 1. Lizzie, good morning. Hi, Lizzie.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. What's on your mind?
What I wanted to say is that I'm glad that George Floyd's family is getting justice, and I hope that this can be a step in the direction for our country where we can start working on racial injustice when it comes to these situations, but it also be recognized on both sides that, just let it be a lesson on both sides, that it's not just about one way or the other, that this affects everybody. And, well, I'm trying to formulate my thought here.
No, that's fine.
I'm trying to say this. As a white woman, I wouldn't know what it's like to have experienced police brutality, probably in the same sense as a black woman, if I ever faced it.
Listen, we have to go to a break on that, but that's an important point.
And it's important that she notices that.
Right, and the key is here, there are racial components sometimes to this, as we've seen, obviously, in the Floyd case, and in some of these others, when you're looking, at, white officer, black individual that was shot. That comes up. Sometimes things just happen in the course of doing your job. The question is then, though, does the racial component play a role? And you wonder how that plays out in all of these trials. It's got to be on the minds of the jurors, and it can be alluded to by the attorneys. Listen, we'll take a break on that note, and we'll, piggyback on what she just said. We'll take more of your phone calls as well, as we're talking about this with News Channel 5 legal analyst Nick Leonardo. Also, if you have a question or comment on Facebook, we're streaming live right now. We'd like to hear from you, and I'll share that with Nick and share your thoughts when we come back right after this.